Welcome back for another week of Grace Kids Online. I'm so glad to be with you again this week. I missed doing this last week, but I hope you enjoyed the Night Owls and Early Birds video that I posted from last week that talked about God's Word and how God's Word helps us grow. And so with that in mind, God's Word helping us grow, 2 weeks ago in our video, we talked about Psalm 23 and how one of the ways that we know Jesus is called a shepherd. And so the sheep hear his voice, and we talked a little bit about that 2 weeks ago. And so today I want to tell a story about listening for God's voice and how someone in the Bible had to learn what that sounded like. Okay, and so today we're going to find our story in 1 Samuel 3. And we're talking about a boy named Samuel, a kid named Samuel, who was a very special boy. See, his mom had prayed very hard for a child because she could not have kids for a long time. And she prayed and she prayed and she prayed, and she promised God that if God gave her a child, that she would dedicate him to the Lord, that he would work at the temple. He would work with the Lord's people, okay? So she did have a child, and when he got old enough, he went to work at the temple. And so back then, the priest, in this case, it's Eli, the priest, they lived right there at the place. They lived there. They slept there. They ate there. They worked there. They took care of the place. And so Eli and Samuel were there. And at this point in the story, we see that it's nighttime. It's time for bed for Samuel and for Eli. And so we pick up in 1 Samuel 3, starting with verse 1. It said, "Meanwhile, the boy Samuel served the Lord by assisting Eli. Now, in those days, messages from the Lord were very rare, and visions didn't happen very often. They didn't hear right from God very often back then, okay? And so visions were very rare as well. It was quite uncommon to see a picture of something, to hear directly from God. Okay, so one night, Eli, who was almost blind by this point, had gone to bed, and the lamp of God had not yet gone out. And Samuel was sleeping in the tabernacle near the ark of God. And suddenly the Lord called to Samuel. And the Lord called out, "Samuel." And Samuel woke up. He said, "Yes, what is it?" And he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am. Did you call me?" And Eli said, "I didn't call you. Go back to bed." And so he did. And so he goes back to sleep, and he's laying there, and he hears his name again. The Lord once again called out to Samuel, "Samuel." And Samuel gets up, and he runs to Eli. "What is it? Here I am. Did you call me?" And Eli's like, "No, I didn't call you, my son. Go back to bed." And Samuel, at this point, did not yet know the Lord. He had not heard his voice because he'd never heard the message from the Lord before. So he didn't know what his voice sounded like. And so the Lord called a third time, "Samuel." And Samuel got up and went to Eli. "Here I am. Did you call me?" And Eli finally realized what was happening. He finally realized that the Lord was calling the boy. And so he told Samuel, "Go and lie down again. And if someone calls again, say this, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" And so Samuel did as Eli said. He went back, he laid back down. The Lord once again called Samuel, and this time Samuel answered with, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." And then the Lord gave Samuel a message. The Lord told Samuel something that was important for Eli, his master there, the person in charge of him, to know. He gave him a message regarding Eli's family. It wasn't an easy message, but he heard it and he gave it. But in this place, we see in this story that Samuel doesn't yet know the voice. When we talked about this idea that Jesus is shepherd, that the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. And like our memory verse from that week, the Lord is my shepherd, I have all that I need, in Psalm 23:1. But what does that mean? And talking about sheep and how they know the shepherd's voice. Here we see Samuel learning what God's voice sounded like. And we can do the same thing. We may not know what it is the first time we hear it. We may not recognize him trying to get our attention the first time, just like Samuel wasn't quite sure what was happening in the middle of the night when God's calling to him. But we can listen because Jesus said that people who follow him know his voice. And Jesus wants us to listen and to follow him as well. And so I hope you think about that this week. And so some things to talk about right now, like some things you can talk about right now with your families, with the other adults in your house, with the other kids in your house. What are some things that God tells us to do? Like God told Samuel a message about Eli's family, and he was supposed to go tell him that message. But what are some things that God tells us to do? Last week, that video talked about how God's word helps us grow and how also, as well as helping us grow, God's word has the answers to those things. He tells us things that he wants us to do while living this life. So talk about that. What are some things that God tells us to do? And then also talk about, if you heard God say something out loud, what do you think his voice would sound like? If you heard God say something out loud, what do you think his voice would sound like? And talk about that together. So some things you might do together today or sometime this week as we think about this idea of knowing Jesus' voice and listening for his voice. Maybe you can go for a walk as a family, as a household. You can go for a walk and no one talk. Just listen. And no one says anything except to say, oh, I hear birds. Or, oh, I hear wind in the trees. Or, oh, I hear cars driving by. Just listen to the world around us and listen for God's voice. And also, another thing that you could play, a game you could play as a family, is the adults in your house, parents, this is for you. Maybe you could find different things in your house that make noise, maybe a pen that clicks, or a container opening, or a bag, or something, noises, and have the kids close their eyes. And when you make the noise, that they have to figure out what the noise was. Was it a pop can opening? Was it a pen clicking? Was it a snack bag opening? Was it a container being opened, the fridge door opening, the front door opening? Different things like that. You can play that game together. And just this listening and hearing and identifying what we're hearing and getting to know God's voice better. And getting to know what his voice sounds like. Just like Samuel here, he didn't know what he was hearing. He thought Eli was calling him. And God is always, he wants to connect with us. He wants to talk with us. Jesus wants to connect with us. And we'll hear God's voice calling us as well. Maybe not out loud, just a sense of it there. Like, oh, I just know that that's different. Oh, that sounds like something I heard from the Bible. Maybe that's something else like that. And so this week, as you talk about knowing God's voice and how he wants us to know his voice, what are some ways that you can know his voice? Do you know his voice? What are some ways that you can practice knowing what his voice sounds like? Or ways that you can take time as a family to listen for what God is saying for you today and this week? And so I hope you have a wonderful week. 2 weeks ago, I gave you that memory verse I just said from Psalm 23:1. The Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. I have all that I need. Maybe not everything we want, but everything we need. And in this time, it's a good thing to remember that he is leading and guiding us no matter what the world looks like, no matter what is going on. The Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. I hope you have a wonderful week and have a wonderful day.